All right, today we're finding out once and for all if I hate historical fiction. Hello, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be reading a handful of historical fiction books, watching a handful of historical fiction movies, and coming to the conclusion on whether or not I really hate historical fiction. I feel like I say it so often in videos, especially list videos, because these books tend to feature there, that I'm just not a big fan of historical fiction. Maybe it's because I have a degree in history, maybe I'm just burnt out on it, I'm not quite sure. I just don't tend to enjoy these books. I tend to find that they are vehicles for women to be treated really, really poorly, and I don't know, it's not that I'm only looking for escapism in my fiction. I just feel like if I'm going to see suffering up close, I'd rather get it from like a non-fiction source. But is that actually true? Is that actually the case? Most of the historical fiction books I read, I am forced to read from lists for list videos that I take on. I never tend to pick up historical fiction of my own accord. So in this video, I'm picking up 3 books from 3 different sources, and I'm going to find out if I actually do hate historical fiction or if there is one out there that could be for me. But before we get into it, I want to tell you a little bit about the sponsor of today's video, Nurex. Said it once, I'll say it again. As someone on camera every day, I really value my skin looking as good as possible and being as healthy as possible. And I only want to use things that are tailored to my specific skin, not just generic over-the-counter solutions. Nurex is a digital healthcare platform that offers more than 50 clinically proven treatments for melasma, acne, and anti-aging. This includes treatments like retinoid products, which are up to 20 times more potent than over-the-counter retinols. Nurex is incredible because they connect you with a licensed medical provider to address your health concerns and receive a personalized treatment plan for you. You don't have to wait months to see a provider, which I also love. Who wants to wait months and months when you have a concern with your skin? You can complete a medical consultation anytime and have access to 24/7 care and support if you ever have any questions. Nurex always has your back. Thanks to Nurex for sponsoring this video. Taking control of your health starts here. Go to nurex.com/chandler.ainsley to get started, or click the link in the description down below. That's nurx.com/chandler.ainsley. Thanks again to Nurex for sponsoring this portion of today's video. Now let's get into the vlog portion of this video. I have a feeling things are going to get pretty interesting. Starting my historical fiction journey off in spectacularly depressing fashion, I am 50% into The Women by Kristen Hanna. This is the book that I expect to like the least, which is why I decided to pick it up first, because then we can only go up from here. And actually, I'm not hating this. This book is about the Vietnam War, which I did not know when picking it up. After looking at the cover of this book, it was kind of stupid of me not to know that this was about Vietnam. I decided to pick this up because it is a current title, it's a popular title, and I feel like Kristen Hanna is one of the, mainstays of this genre, and so why not, pick up one of her books. I've had mixed success with her stuff in the past. I did not personally like The Nightingale. I did actually enjoy The Four Winds, and I think I'm liking this one because it shares commonalities with The Four Winds, and that commonality is that this handles a period of history that I don't feel like is touched on enough. That's not to say that there are not books about the Vietnam War. In fact, I've read some books about the Vietnam War before, but it's just a time period in history that's really tough because even when the war was going on, people didn't want to talk about it. People who came back from war disrespected, even though they didn't necessarily want to be a soldier. They came back and they didn't have the support that they really needed afterwards. People dealt with horrible PTSD, and I knew all of this going into this book, but I guess reading a firsthand account, especially from a different perspective, has been interesting. And I say firsthand account, I mean, obviously this is fiction and it is not someone's real experience, but it does appear that Kristen Hanna does a fair amount of research, and I would bet that this is like fairly accurate to some people's experiences. So our main character, Frankie, is the daughter of a really patriotic couple, shall we say. I believe the father wasn't necessarily like in the military, but he likes to kind of pretend that he was, and or is just like, very pro-America. His son, Frankie's brother, ends up going to Vietnam, and Frankie's really inspired by this. She kind of wants to go and use her nursing skills. She went to school for nursing, kind of put those to use after she has signed up, but before she can leave, she finds out that her brother is dead. And this kind of puts a weird feeling on Frankie when she ends up leaving for Vietnam. She kind of regrets her decision because she's not going to be there with her brother. She's like, well, shit, like if he died, I'm scared of my prospects. The first 50% of this book is really all about Frankie's experience in Vietnam, helping injured American soldiers, learning a little bit more about Vietnam. Not a ton. She does have some contact with Vietnamese people, but not a ton. And it's really just her, coping with the day-to-day traumas of like treating these injured soldiers who have been blown to smithereens. She develops a couple of different romances along the way. She makes some friends with other fellow nurses who kind of teach her the way. Despite how I kind of feel about Frankie, I really do appreciate the insight this story has given me into what it would be like to be a nurse in Vietnam. Not only were the soldiers like completely ignored when they came back, I can't imagine what it would be like to be a woman coming back from a place like this, and people just want you to kind of go back to how things were, find a husband, be a good woman. Frankie, now that she is back in the US after serving, she really doesn't know how to cope because her parents don't want to acknowledge her sacrifice. Her parents didn't want her to go in the first place. You know, she still has contact with a couple of the women she, you know, was a nurse with, but she's really floundering. The person that she is in love with is still in Vietnam, so she's kind of like, I just feel very lost. I'm curious to see what the next 50% of this book is going to be. Is it going to be more of her experiences at home? Is she going to go back to Vietnam? Is she going to end up with a person that she has like claimed she's in love with? Or is that love going to look different in the context of being in America? Is he going to have like a crazy amount of PTSD? Is it not going to work out? I don't know. I am intrigued to know, but I will say this book is sad. I mean, it's historical fiction. I feel like that's kind of par for the course, which I didn't really think about when deciding to do this video, but yeah, the vibes are just fucking depressing. Maybe more so than some of the other books that I've read by her, because in Kristen Hanna's other books, like thinking about The Nightingale, I believe that's about two sisters, and they have each other. And then thinking about The Four Winds, it's about like a mom and like children. In this book, I just feel like Frankie is so isolated and so alone, and that makes it even more, you know, depressing. Again, I'm liking that the time period is different and something that I haven't really read a ton of. I like that it's, you know, a less covered part of history. I just don't know that I like Kristen Hanna's brand of storytelling. She always centers her books on women, which I think is nice. I do appreciate that, but just something about historical fiction, which I'm sure I'll say multiple times throughout this video, is that women tend to get the short end of the stick always throughout history. We still are, technically, but I think I tend to not want to pick up stories that have women going through really, really hard things, because I feel like as women in the real world, we already go through really hard things. I want to read about happy. I want to read about the fantasy, right? I do think it's important to challenge ourselves and to not just read our own experiences and try to be escapist all the time with our fiction reading. But yeah, I tend to not pick up historical fiction because it tends to just be depressing. I do think Kristen Hanna in some of her stories, I haven't gotten that in this book yet, but in some of her stories, she tends to do this thing where the women suffer beautifully. Like, she sacrificed everything for her family. She did this or that or the other and like sacrifices herself for the greater good. I don't like that message. I like don't think that's a positive one. And it seems weird considering all of her books center around women. Like, why can't women be truly triumphant? And everybody like interprets that differently. I think some people are like, oh, well, they are in the context of their, you know, time period. I'm like, sure, I guess. Was nobody happy back then? I don't know. Kind of where I'm at. I'm curious to see, I guess, how this video proceeds too, because, you know, I definitely have ideas about how I feel about historical fiction, and I'm genuinely curious if those are going to change or if this is going to just reiterate all the things that I feel about historical fiction. So I'm gonna finish this book. I will let you know my final thoughts and feelings when I do. Hello, friends. I've got a partner back here, and he's gonna say some stuff in a little bit because we're gonna watch a movie together.
What movie are we watching?
I have shorts on. If anyone wanted to know, I do. I'm not naked. I finished The Women, and I wanted to give you my final thoughts on it before we get into something completely different in The Gladiator. I think the last time we talked, I got 50% into this book, and I was enjoying the real life look at what it would be like to be in Vietnam as a nurse, because you don't really, I mean, okay, soldiers generally didn't get a lot of respect when they came back. We don't hear as much about the Vietnam War as we should, just because of the fact that the US didn't really win that. And it's definitely not great when it comes to the way that women were treated who like went over there too, right? And that's a big theme of this book, the disrespect and the lack of attention that women got during the war. And normally I don't love that vibe, because that's kind of what Kristen Hanna does in all of her books. Like, women don't get enough respect. In this context, it made a lot of sense. It's real life, and I appreciated it. I mean, granted, women don't get a lot of respect in all time periods in history for sure, but I don't know. I liked the way the beginning of this book was told. My fucking problem came in at the 50% mark. Our main character, Frankie, comes home. Not only is she like disrespected by her friends and family, but she just makes some of the dumbest decisions. And not only that, but bad shit just continuously happens to her. And I don't think that it would have been realistic, obviously, to have her come home from war and just completely go back to living her everyday life, right? That's not true to her experience and her trauma. But the way that this woman got put through the ringer, like, I don't want to get into the spoilers. I don't want to get into the spoilers of the book, but think of any possible tragedy that could happen to a woman, and it probably happened to Frankie for sure. There's like a pretty big addiction storyline as well, which like that, okay, sure. I wish that we would have like just stuck to that as really the issue, right? But there were so many things that kept coming up, and it felt like trauma corn, if you will. I have to agree with a lot of the Goodreads reviews in that respect, and it's frustrating because I think it took away from an overall interesting story. And honestly, when I really reflect, I think that's a lot of my problem with Kristen Hanna. Like, not only does she have these stories of women in history, and they're always like deeply depressing and the women never end up happy, but it's like she really doesn't want to have any subtlety in her stories. And I noticed that with a lot of like literary fiction and historical fiction authors. They don't respect their audience enough to be subtle with this stuff. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying like don't have, again, these hard-hitting issues. I think it would have been better for the drug problem that Frankie develops to be kind of insidious and develop slowly over time and start maybe breaking down some of her relationships and her not being able to like connect with people. But it was like she came home from war traumatized. She stayed traumatized. No one helped her. She spiraled really, really badly. Every bad thing that could possibly happen to her. And I was just like, Jesus Christ. Like, yes, I'm sure this happened to other people too, but it's just so much that I didn't want to read. Like, it just felt almost unrealistic. That's definitely a personal nitpick of mine. Granted, I'm not the only person who felt that way, but it's just really tough to know how to read this book because, again, a time period in history that's not often discussed. On the other hand, I don't love the way that Kristen Hanna writes her like characters and the way that they move through the world. So that leaves me in kind of a tough situation because she obviously did the research. She has an author's note at the end kind of about how she did the research for the story. Now she's really wanted to tell this one for a while, and it's very evident like she had passion for it. But again, I just wish the execution had been a little different. So I'd probably give this one 3 stars. Like, definitely not a bad book, definitely not my favorite book, which is par for the course. And that's a generous rating, I think, for me in terms of the things that I've given Kristen Hanna or rated Kristen Hanna's books. So yeah, we're gonna go 3 stars. Hayden, do you want to join me, my friend? He's just the head in the back. Have you seen Gladiator?
Yes, but a really long time ago.
I've never seen it, and I kind of want to, and they're not remaking. There's like a sequel coming out.
Really?
With Paul Mescal.
Who's that?
Hayden doesn't know who that is. I don't think you've seen anything with him in it. He's in the Normal People television program.
Even know what that is.
He's in some other stuff too. I think he's Irish and he's sexy, and that's all we really need to know.
This lighting's almost making me look tan. Kind of crazy.
I think Pedro Pascal is also in it, and I like that man. Everybody just looks hot and sweaty and muscly, and I'm excited. Excited for this one. Also excited for the new one. So I figured this would be a good primer. I don't really have any expectations going into it. I feel like I like to say before the movie starts, like kind of what I'm expecting. I'm expecting hot men fighting, and I'm expecting blood and gore. My goals with the movies that I selected were, let's do something mildly romantic like Titanic. Kind of tragic. Also a classic that I've never seen. Gladiator I picked because, I don't know, war times, sexy men. Yeah, I don't know anything about it. And that's it. Heard it's good.
Yeah, I really don't remember. I mean, like, I know that it's like...
I think it's like critically acclaimed.
It's decent, yeah. It's been a long time since I've seen anything with Russell in it.
I mean, he'd still be making shit.
I know, I just don't watch any of it.
We just don't watch movies.
You know?
This is like the times that we watch movies. I also forced him to watch Star Wars with me, which I'm sure y'all saw. Okay, I'm talking too much. I'm gonna go and watch this movie, and I will report back tomorrow morning.
Goodbye.
We've got to stop meeting like this. And by that, I mean in the dark of my bedroom. We're going to be seeing a lot of me in the daylight. Anyway, let's talk about Gladiator, which I watched with Hayden last night. Obviously, it's the clip you just saw. I actually really enjoyed this. It's not that I expected not to, but I feel like my opinion of older movies, just my overall opinion, my general feeling about movies that are older tends to be that I don't think they're very good. I don't feel like most of them hold up over time. Even these movies that are like lauded as being so amazing, I go and watch them, no experience with them, no nostalgia for them, and I'm like, I think it's just not there. The acting's not there, the emotion's not there. I mean, you could definitely see it in like the Star Wars movies that I watched for the science fiction version of this video that I did. Even in other movies, I just am, I guess, surprised at how far we've come. Like, if you watch something like Succession, it is paper real, right? Those people seemingly experiencing the emotions that they're acting. Like, it just feels like you were there with actual people. And I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect when I watch certain movies, right? In this movie, I can't say that I felt super close to the characters, but the emotions that the actors displayed, I thought were very genuine and very realistic, especially Joaquin Phoenix and his portrayal of Caesar. I was really just impressed with him altogether. Marcus, I think is his name. I was really impressed with the rawness of his emotions, especially the like kind of pinnacle, not penultimate, but like the really like game-changing scene between him and his father. I was surprised at like how far the emotion went, and like it was a little melodramatic, but it really worked for the scene. And there were so many moments like that throughout the movie. There were a couple of moments also where I cringed and thought, I wouldn't have made that choice. But for the most part, everything felt very real. I guess filmmaking aside and emotions aside, what I really appreciated about this was that it, I guess, exposed me to a time period in history that I just really don't know much about. Kind of exposes you to different facets of humanity. I think that is historical fiction really thrives. If I have to like sit down and actually give it some compliments, give it its props, historical fiction does do a really good job at, again, showing us what has happened in the past, showing us how humans throughout history are all kind of the same. We're doomed to repeat things, obviously, if we don't reflect upon what's happened in the past. I think what really struck me the most about Gladiator and about the story of gladiators is just how brutal it was back then, and how humanity just, I don't want to say didn't look like it does now, because people are still brutal and awful, and we often overlook genocides and things like that, but I feel like seeing people fight to the death, I mean, that's just like a whole nother level, right? And yeah, I obviously like in theory knew these things existed. Also, I was like, is it just dramatized for like movies? I mean, I guess to some extent it probably is, but you know, when asking Hayden, who I guess knows more about this time period than me, I say that skeptically just because I was the history major, and you know, I feel like I should know more than he does about certain things. No, he was able to like educate me on stuff that I just like didn't know about, and I was asking him questions throughout the movie. And yeah, also like the opening scene, the like conquering war scene in Germania or Germany, wow, like that was kind of wild. I liked it. I liked it quite a bit. I thought it was actually a pretty solid movie. That being said, the mood that it put me in, no, I should not have watched that before bed. I did not sleep well. I also went to sleep too late, and then today I have been in a fog, which is why you're seeing me late, because I only now have energy. I think that's it for Gladiator. I think those are my most profound thoughts for that movie, but honestly solid. And I think also maybe because I really had no knowledge of the movie going in, except for, you know, Russell Crowe's kind of hot. I don't know, I kind of thought it would be like corny, like dude bro movie, kind of like Braveheart, or what is it? Die Hard? What's the like one that everybody claims is a Christmas movie? I kind of thought this would be similar to that. It was actually, I think it had more merit, so glad I watched it. Let's talk about the Alice Network. I am reading this because it is a featured book for a list that I'm working on. I wouldn't normally pick up a book like this for a video like this because I already read a very like rah-rah, woman-centric historical fiction novel, and I really tend to stay away from like the world wars. I picked this one up because I have to read it, okay, frankly, and it just fit the video. It fit the video. It's different than I expected, and I don't know if it's good or bad. Alice Network is about two women, and it's kind of about how their lives intersect. What I find interesting is I thought this was just going to be about World War II, period. It's actually not. It's one woman dealing with stuff post World War II, and it's one woman in the midst of World War I and also post World War II. Because they connect, okay? Right? So let me try to tell you. We've got Charlie. It's 1947. She is pregnant, and she is being sent to Europe to like take care of the pregnancy, but that's not her intention when she goes to Europe. She goes to London to see if she can figure out what happened to her cousin Rose. This was like a sister to her, and she disappeared, I believe, during the occupation of France, and she is holding out hope that Rose is still alive and that someone will know what happened to her. So she hits up this woman named, is it Eve Gardner. And Eve is a bit of an alcoholic in present day, again in 1947, but back in 1915, when the First World War was going on, she becomes a spy to help fight against Germany, which I think is like kind of intriguing. And I will be honest, like I haven't gotten that far into the book, so I don't really know like how much we're getting of each different timeline and like how those timelines are going to necessarily intersect. But again, we have Charlie coming to Eve to like ask questions, and like I guess maybe she thinks Eve knows where Rose went. Maybe Rose was a spy. I don't know. We're gonna find out, I guess. I'm liking it and disliking it more than I thought. I like that it's not just about being in the midst of World War II. It's, I'm assuming, more than that. What I'm not liking is how, I don't want to say complex the story is, but I feel like I wanted this to like smoothly lead us into what the story is immediately. Instead, I feel like we're kind of puttering around with like side characters at the beginning that I don't really care about. We're learning more about these two women, and I'll be honest with you, I kind of wish they were just vessels for the story. They're both kind of irritating, and I don't really care about their backstories, which is unfair to say, and it makes me sound like I don't like women. I do, I really do. But I feel like a lot of the women in historical fiction books are kind of pitiful and kind of like hard to read about, so hopefully as I carry on, they'll have reasons for being the way that they are, and I will come to love them. But right now, I can't say that I am. You know, we've got a long journey and a long road ahead of us, so I'm gonna strap the fuck in. Also, we get to watch Titanic tomorrow, which I'm excited about. Know that it's semi-romantic, and I like that. I think that that's gonna be the game changer for me. It's like historical fiction, something with like a good romance storyline. Honestly, maybe what I'm finding out is that I just like movies and I don't like books. It is in fact daytime. I do exist in the daytime on occasion. I also on occasion DNF books, and I'm gonna DNF the Alice Network. I gave it my best shot. I got 50% into this book, and for me, I like to DNF books pretty early on. Like if I know that I'm not vibing with something and I know there's absolutely no way I can enjoy it, I'm like 10-20% in, let's just call it quits, okay? This one I decided, okay, you know, I'm not giving this enough of a fair shake. I need to read more, I need to get more into it. Really, if I just like buckle down and listen while I play Two Dots, which is like my focus mode, I'm gonna have a better time with this book. And it just never fucking materialized. It just never happened. If my issue with The Women by Kristen Hanna was how much I didn't really love Frankie's characters in this book are just so awful. I don't know what I expected from this story. If you read the synopsis, it's very clear that this is about two women and their journeys of, I don't want to say self-discovery, but of their own personal journeys. It's about their personal journeys set against the backdrop of World War I and World War II. I don't know that this book gave a fresh and interesting perspective on a time period in history, right? I read All the Light We Cannot See recently, and while that book was not my favorite because I don't really love World War II historical fiction typically, I could appreciate what that one did because it gave me a perspective that I hadn't thought about really, and I hadn't really seen before. We get real life accounts of what this stuff was like. Most of the time, whenever we're reading about World War II, the types of characters who we read about are all mostly the same. And I'm not saying that it's bad necessarily to focus on characters who are in a concentration camp, for instance. That's often the point of view that we get in World War II fiction. But I appreciated what All the Light We Cannot See did because, again, it was this sort of unique perspective. We've got a girl living in occupied France. We've got a boy who is a German soldier because he's an orphan and he just doesn't have any other options. And I think were interesting perspectives, and I think gave me more of an inside look into what it would have been like to live during that in Europe. I thought the characters were very neutral, so I guess that also probably helped. This book, it's just, there's so little about the war or even really the happenings of this time period or the couple of time periods that are present that it was like, why am I reading this? It was like this author wanted to write two miserable characters, just decided to plop them anywhere in history, frankly. I think that's a bit of an oversimplification if we're actually getting down into the weeds. Eve is having to deal with, I guess, like sleeping with a guy that she works with to avoid questions about who she is because she's a spy. Obviously, there is some stuff that is pertaining to the World Wars, but it's not enough to keep me engaged. And I don't care about the relationship between Eve, Charlie, like I just don't give a shit. It's just not compelling. It's just not an interesting book. And I don't know what I expected, but the title, The Alice Network, and knowing this is going to be a spy story, I was intrigued. I just don't think this is going to be a win for me. And I think I'm going to say it now. I'm giving up on World War II fiction. There's mention of it. If it's in there, I just don't want it. I don't care. I know a lot about World War II. I studied it a ton in school. So much else that has happened in the world that just doesn't get enough attention and is fascinating and bleak and sad and can tell like an important lesson. And I don't feel like we need any more World War II. Pop on over to my bed and watch Titanic for the first time. Honestly, this is just like pure indulgence. My brain today. It's pure indulgence. I've never seen this film. The only James Cameron films I'm pretty sure I've seen are the Avatar films. She's fucking scary. Titanic's a big deal. So many people have seen it. I remember my next door neighbors growing up had the like double VHSs, and I remember they like watched it kind of around the time it came out. I never did because I was really little, obviously, when this movie came out, and I've just never seen it. So I'm ready to give it a chance, especially again since there's like a romantic subplot. And then after that we can read Homegoing. And by after that I mean I've actually already started it. So much better than the other shit I've been reading. All right. I'm damn near halfway in and we're about to get painted like French girls. I haven't had much to say leading up to this, not because I'm not enjoying it, but because I just haven't had much to say. It's not like this is I don't want to say it's not like it's a historical movie, but this one I feel like deviates more from history than perhaps Gladiator. I don't know if that's fair. I don't know if that's a fair thing to say, but let me break it down for you. Let me break down what I'm liking, what I'm not liking, etc., etc. First up, this movie is exquisitely beautiful. That is the first thing that I noticed once I started watching. Now, the intro I think was a little corny and like not my favorite, and we can get back to that in a little bit. Set dressing, the costume design, everything about this movie is beautiful, and it just really goes to show how far we've come in terms of movies and how much we invest in them. Like, movies just don't get made like this anymore. And obviously Titanic was a big thing when it was made too. I'm sure they spent tons of money on making it, and it shows. It is a genuinely beautiful movie. And there's only a few times so far that the CGI looks not great. The CGI of the ship is really, really incredible, actually, and quite impressive. The only times that you can tell it's CGI that, like, are really obvious are the scenes where we're leaning over the ship or on the ship at night. Other than that, everything looks, I mean, just so beautiful and richly appointed. Like, they did not spare any expense to make this thing absolutely stunning. And I feel the same way about the characters as well. I feel like they were really well cast for their parts. We were instantly drawn in to Rose's character. She is this young woman who is engaged to a man who is kind of a piece of shit. She doesn't want to be engaged to him, and she's definitely spoiled, but she's not necessarily a brat. She is trying to do the best that she can because her family no longer has a fortune and she needs to get married to, you know, sustain her lifestyle and sustain the lifestyle of her family. I think her father's passed away, and so her and her mom like need. Jack is just this free spirit artist who is unexpectedly on the Titanic. They have this chance encounter, this chance meeting, and they really see something in each other. And it's so charming, and it does remind me a lot of the romance novels that I've met. I love this sort of opposites attract thing that's going on. And like I said, I think the characters are really well cast. I also have to point out, I fucking love Kathy Bates, and I didn't know she was in this movie, and she's already been so funny and just like perfect. She is a scene stealer in whatever movie she's in. I adore her. So I'm so glad. She brings a lot of much needed levity to the story. What I'm not liking about the story is, I want to say, the lack of historical detail. I don't personally care a ton about the historical detail of the Titanic, but the fact that we're trying to figure out what happened to like this necklace, I just don't care about that. I feel like that's not really true to the Titanic story. I mean, maybe it is. I don't know that much about the fucking Titanic, but I think I care more about people who are aboard the ship and the reason the ship was built. And we're getting some of that, you know, some exposition from some characters. Since Rose is wealthy, like she's talking to the people who created the ship, but for the most part, I feel like it's not. Like there's not a ton of history going on. Just also, the beginning of this movie is kind of fucking silly. Like, let's be real. You've got people going in a submersible to try to find, is it the heart of the ocean? The necklace that Rose used to have. And they get in contact with Rose in her old age, like in the 90s, I want to say. It's just set in like present day of when the movie was made. Like the other part of the movie, the part that's not during the Titanic's only sailing. One of my, I don't want to say least favorite literary or like storytelling devices is when we have an introduction to a story given by the person who's going to tell it. Like, when asked me to tell the story of this, and this is what's going to happen. Like, we're being told the story from Rose's point of view. I don't know. It reads a little corny to me. I kind of just think it's, yeah, silly. I mean, it's kind of the same as like The Notebook. Also kind of corny with like the past and present time. Like, 'cause I'm pretty sure the hero in The Notebook is the one like telling the story. No, as a historical, like, should I have picked this? Like, probably not. I don't think this is like the best ever, but at the same time, I think that the costume and the set design such that I am learning more about what it was like in terms of class differences at the time of this sailing. Not that I was unaware that class differences have existed all throughout human history, but it is interesting seeing just how different people existed, you know? Getting to see Rose hanging out below deck and like having genuine unfettered fun versus the like kind of staid, subdued lifestyle she has to live, you know, on the upper decks of the ship. And so far so good. I kind of like the romance. It is kind of sweet. I like the connection between Jack and Rose. That being said, I mean, I know how this ends. I mean, I haven't seen this movie before, but I also have lived in pop culture and like in the world, so I do know what happens at the end of this movie. So I'm not like getting too attached or anything. We're about to see this woman get naked, so it should be fine. No, because why are they sweaty? Why was the hand on the glass of that car? Also, the music's taking me out. I think had I watched this like when it originally came out, I would have been like, oh, the score is so beautiful. I'm so sick of it. Like, no offense to Celine Dion, but goddamn, look at this. They be humping. Things are not great on the Titanic. Let me just say, this movie does a really good job at capturing emotion. Let me tell you, like, the idea of like your first love, so excellent. Panic and the terror, knowing they hit the iceberg, like things are about to go down. Everybody is just kind of like in shock and also doesn't want to accept reality. And then things start going very quickly and also so slowly at the same time. Rose is like trying to save Jack. I'm stressed. Why do I keep watching scary movies before bed? Y'all need to not let me do this. I might actually be sad at the end of this. Okay, so I finished the Titanic, obviously. It is the next day. And I feel like I made it through both more emotionally traumatized than I thought and also less. I think because I didn't watch this in 1997 when it came out, I obviously knew what was going to happen. I mean, I think everybody knows what's going to happen. But while I didn't care so much about the romantic thread of the story, like it was well done, I just didn't care so much about it. The way that the sinking of the Titanic in this movie happens is so impactful. It's half of the movie is the sinking, and I don't know what I expected. I thought it would almost be like glossed over and it would really just be a romance, and while romance is obviously at the center of the story, it's so much more than that. Like, it is about obviously human ego and error and so many other things. It's very good. It's very good. I understand why this is a classic and why so many people enjoy it. In terms of like historical merit, I do think, again, that what I gained from this story is more about the kinds of people that were living and the sorts of class dynamics that were occurring during this time period, rather than it being this like war backdrop or this like really, I was gonna say particular time in history. I mean, obviously this is a historical event that actually happened, like it's very much historical fiction in that regard, but it is such a once in a lifetime kind of thing that it's not like I was learning like just a ton of new facts and information that I hadn't previously. But I mean, it's a great movie for what it is. So let's move on to Homegoing, because it's the last book that I'm reading for this video, and it is by far the best as well. It's by Jesse. For some reason, whenever I saw this last name, I was thinking like Gyasi or something like that, but the audiobook narrator basically says like Jesse. This book is very interesting, and I love the way that it is told. So it's about two half-sisters growing up in Ghana, kind of at the very beginning of the slave trade. One sister is belittled and abused kind of growing up, ends up marrying a white man, and has a very different life than her half-sister, who was loved and brought up in kindness for the most part, and ends up sold into the slave trade. So each sister has different lineage, obviously, from there. One is staying in Ghana and having children there, and her children are growing up amongst the slave trade. Like, man that one of these sisters marries is like part of the slave trade, like he is in charge of it to an extent, a part in selling people. Then the other sister, again, is sold into slavery. She goes to America as a part of the slave trade, and it's about her lineage, children and grandchildren born into slavery. And each chapter, each chunk of the book is told from a different person's point of view, following one of the matrilineal lines, I guess. It's just so fascinating. Again, I think when we think about the slave trade and what that looked like, I think most of us are picturing the antebellum South. We're picturing plantations, we're picturing that sort of thing, and that is very much present in this book, but this is giving you a wider view of kind of what that looked like. It's really, really fascinating, genuinely. I wish, again, that more books like this were popular, because, again, I just find not regurgitating, but we're just like going over the same periods of history over and over again, and it's always from this like white Eurocentric perspective, and I don't care about that. Like, obviously all genocide and all of that is terrible, regardless of skin color, but the Holocaust happened to white people. For the most part, we hear about that so much more often, and I love learning about other parts of the world, so I'm really, really enjoying this. I love to see different cultures as well. It's cool seeing the different like religious rituals and like practices and like cultural norms in Ghana at the time, and how it like evolves over time. Loving each individual perspective too. It's like everybody's got their own thing going on amongst what is happening around them. Obviously, it's incredibly impressive to me that each character, despite only having about a chapter's worth of time in the book, feels more real, feels more realized than a lot of characters that I read in historical fiction. Like, I'm genuinely impressed, and I'm genuinely very much enjoying this book. Obviously, it's harrowing and hard to read about. This is not like easy stuff, but it is incredibly informative, and the kind of historical fiction that I should have been picking up. Not that I ever really willingly pick up historical fiction on my own. It's not like I've been like willingly like, let me read some World War II historical fiction even though I hate it. It's like, those are the ones that tend to be on lists for list videos. Those are the ones that tend to get a lot of popularity, garner, you know, book awards and stuff. But this shit's good. And honestly, this one is nominated for awards. It is on a list for list video. That's part of the reason that I selected this one. But I also selected this one because a friend recommended it. She said it was fantastic, and I love relying on my friends for book recommendations for videos like this, because so many of my friends do read historical fiction and have great recommendations. So I am in fact yapping. I am in fact enjoying this book, and I am really curious to see where we end up. I don't know how far this book goes into present day, but I would assume pretty far, given kind of where I'm at right now on the 50% mark of the book. So I'm gonna keep reading, and I'll let you know my final thoughts and feelings when I'm done. All right, so of course that was fucking brilliant. The ending scene, Marcus's chapter, it was so good, so powerful. It really like made everything come full circle. I really enjoyed this. This was like just excellent. I feel like everybody needs to read it. It's tough because when I like reflect on this book and like what this taught me, I mean, it taught me a lot about history for sure, but I think this was more about intergenerational trauma in a sense, and also just like what our destinies might look like if we hadn't been born of who we were born of, if that makes sense. Like, obviously I know that our parents and our ancestors are kind of the reason behind why we are where we're at a given moment. You know what I mean? Like, I live in Texas because my family is from Texas, right? Expanding out on that, zooming out and seeing how decisions that you make, circumstances outside of your control, can lead you to a certain place, which is very much on full display in this book, which I thought was really interesting. I mean, it's not like I've never considered that before. Like, I have thought about the fact that I have ancestors, not to this extent. I thought that was really interesting. I would say, like, this book takes a different approach, and so if you're wanting, a true history, I would say go pick up like a nonfiction book. This, I loved it because it had the historical bits as sort of the context for each character, rather than us having to learn about cardboard characters set in a certain time period. I don't think that I can sum up how great this was. I really feel like you need to go and pick it up. If you want to read, I think it's Transcendent Kingdom. Got a really pretty cover, and I feel like I'd saw that one everywhere when it came out, like 2020. But yeah, I think that reflecting on this book and also just this video as a whole, I think that I learned what I already knew. Kind of like with science fiction, it's not like it illuminated this subgenre for me and totally changed my mind about it, but it makes me want to seek out what I like within a genre. You know what I mean? Like science fiction, historical fiction, they're never going to be my go-tos, but I found the specific things I like within a genre. I like the unique storytelling, the interesting like generational breakdown in this book. I really enjoyed the rich storytelling through character, and I really liked learning about non-European people. I really liked that. That's something that I'm going to be seeking out more when I pick up historical fiction of my own accord. It sucks because I don't know that like I'm going to rush out to go pick up a ton more historical fiction after this, but it has definitely opened my eyes, kind of like with science fiction shows. Like right after I finished that video, it's not like I was desperate for science fiction. It did kind of make me want to watch more Star Wars. It did kind of make me think, I wonder what other science fiction's out there that like could be a favorite book of all time that I just haven't picked up because I have preconceived notions, you know? And I feel the same way now about historical fiction. I'm a little burnt out on it at the moment. I don't think I'm going to go and rush out to pick up another historical, but I know for sure that I would pick up more historical fiction in the future, not just for videos, not just when I'm forced to for list videos, but of my own accord, you know? Instead of just scrolling past the lists that Goodreads makes, recommending new things that are coming out within genres, I think I would click on a historical fiction one and kind of see what's there and see what interests me and actually maybe occasionally pick up some historical fiction. So I do think this was a productive video. I am glad that y'all stuck around with me for all of it, the ups and downs, the highs and lows, because there were some, obviously. Again, I think Homegoing is like definitely the best book of these. I do think The Women was pretty decent too, if you can get on board with Kristen Hanna's writing style, especially as it pertains to her female protagonists. And then the movies, I mean, the movies were solid, you know? Gladiator, Titanic, classics. So anyway, thanks so much for watching this video. In the comments down below, I guess let me know what your favorite historical fiction book is, because, you know, I will be seeking out some historical fiction in the future, and I'd love to come back to this video, see the comments. Thanks so much for watching. I love y'all so much, and I'll see you in the next one.